I'm speaking with Shelley Hirsch, who is joining us today from Brooklyn, where you were born 70 years ago today, Shelley. And what an awesome way for us to celebrate your birthday by spending time with you and your music. So thank you very, very much for coming on to the show.
Thank you, Michael, for inviting me.
We've got lots of music lined up today, and I'm going to try to go in roughly chronological order, but our listeners who've been tuned in live just heard War of Dreams, which you recorded with David Weinstein in 1991, inspired, I believe, by the Angela Carter novel.
Yes.
Is there anything you'd like us to know about that piece?
Well, David and I were wonderful partners creatively and, other ways. And we used to jam every week, and I just picked up an Angela Carter book, and he was playing a bass line, and I started reading it from the book and speaking it. And then I was in Berlin, where I decided to make a vocal storm using microphones and delays, digital delays. And so I put together at Harvest Works, a very special place for me, the piece.
This is a studio in Manhattan run by Carol Parkinson for many years.
And so I produced it in the studio. David gave me the bass line, and then I added all my parts with electronics and text and everything else, and then I invited him to come and do a live solo.
And we'll hear some examples later when you're delivering your own texts, and we'll also hear from David Weinstein again. But I'd like to go back to the beginnings, because the entry path to your career has always struck me as interesting, unusual. How is it that you got involved in music, and how did you get involved in this music?
I have to say, as an article I wrote for John Zorn's collection of writing by music, the title was Wired That Way. And I really think that says how I came to it, because as a young kid, I was totally fascinated by the hallways and the acoustics in the apartment building where I grew up, and how the sound changed when I was going from the hallway down the staircase to outside. And my father always came home from his job as a manual laborer and put on the record player, and we danced to Frank Sinatra and, music like that. And then things really changed. The neighborhood was really full of different music. You'd walk 2 blocks and the people are playing congas in the projects.
And remind us which neighborhood that was.
East New York, Brooklyn, which is known to be one of the most dangerous neighborhoods in New York City. But at the time I was growing up, it was during white flight. So at first, everything was kind of idyllic in this apartment building with music coming out of everyone's doorways. Ima Sumac, somebody played, someone, and just all of the music mingling in the hallway and the way it sounded there. And then we moved out down the block to a 2-family house, and life was much darker. And it was during white flight, and our street was one of the only white blocks left in the neighborhood, all white blocks left in the neighborhood. And so it wasn't a very happy time.
What did your schooling look like?
I dropped out of high school. My teachers, especially my English teacher, who turned me on to Ornette Coleman and Bella Bartok, said, "You don't belong in high school at all. You're much too creative and advanced." So I dropped out. He wasn't very happy that I did. He didn't mean that I should do it right away. He was talking more figuratively. But I did. And so I got a job at the American Kennel Club finding misfiled poodles. And then I had an apartment on the Lower East Side, and at one point it was ransacked, and my ex-roommate had moved to San Francisco to go to the Art Institute there, and I went out there. I also knew that there was a very large Japanese neighborhood, and my dream was to do kabuki theater. not knowing that it's only performed by men.
That could be a problem.
Yes. Well, not only that, but somebody stole all my money. There were just a lot of crazy situations. But I wound up, so we found another place to live. We left that apartment where the money was stolen. And I was hitchhiking. And this is after the realization that I wasn't going to study kabuki theater. And someone in the car said, "Oh, I told him about what I was interested in. He said, "Well, there are these workshops that might interest you." And it was experimental theater. And I went to the workshop, and the director was from the Theater of Man, Cecile Lenneman at the time, and Cecile Pineda now. And then I auditioned for the company, and we did a version of the Open Theater's work, The Serpent. And I was the one who was leading the other voices in all these kind of extended techniques. We didn't call it that then, of course, but we'd go to different environments, like out to forts where you go underground, and from above you would hear birds and lots of other sound, and we'd bring that back into the rehearsal room. And and then we went very much from abstract sound into narration and speaking about dreams and things from the Bible. And that stayed with me my whole life, this kind of going from very, abstract sound or extended techniques into more, narrative or more recognizable language. And I'm still very close with the director, who stopped doing theater, but she's written 10 novels, and was 30 years before I ran into her again. And
Wow. And this was in the Bay Area where you were working with her.
San Francisco.
Okay.
So but we performed all over the Bay Area. And, she's kind of a very smart woman and a bit of a intellectual snob. She wouldn't like if I said that, but I said, "Well, why did you like me as an 18-year-old who dropped out of high school?" And she said, "Well, you were reading Walter Benjamin at the time." Like I was carrying a book, by Walter Benjamin with me to the rehearsal. So, but it was the most important time for me because I learned about like physical theater, Jerzy Grotowski. We read Artaud, and also going to all those landscapes and taking the memory of the sound and recreating them in the workshop room, and lots of reading.
Interesting. So when did you return to New York, and how did you get involved in what we think of as the downtown music scene?
So after that, I came back to New York for a short time, and I wanted to continue doing experimental theater. But when I got, after landing in Luxembourg, having a very wild hitchhiking ride through Paris to Amsterdam, I found out that the theater wasn't just this small group anymore. It was the Mickery Theater, which is quite a well-known theater in Amsterdam and not on the outskirts like I had thought. And so I was too intimidated to go there. I was 20 then. And
so this was around 1971 or so.
1972.
Okay.
71 I was performing in the theater group. And 1972, so I was modeling at the art school, and my fellow model and I found a loft which we squatted. It was amazing. And I wound up, it was very cold at night. We didn't have electricity or real heat. We were being heated by a small, what is called an oliekochel, like an oil can. And we went to the bar around the corner most nights, and this one was called the Literaire Cafe. And I heard these guys playing swing music, and a lot of the songs were songs that I listened to with my father, dancing with my father in the living room. And I was a little tipsy, I guess, from a kruidenbitter. And I I went to them afterwards when they took a break, and I said, "Oh my God, I know all those songs. I sing those songs." And they said, "Oh, really? Do you want to audition?" I auditioned, and I was singing with them in that bar for several weeks. What can I say about that?
So you started out crooning in Amsterdam.
There's a song on my record, Where Were You Then? What one is it? Maxime Cardon, and it's about that experience in Amsterdam.
By the mid 70s, you were back in New York.
Oh, I was back. I left the incredible place where, Maxime and I lived, and went back to New York thinking I would say goodbye, get my things, move back. Then I heard that they were tearing the building down because they were building a metro there.
This was the building in Amsterdam where you were
Where I
staying?
lived, yeah,
Okay.
where I squatted with Maxime. It was incredible, but beautiful. And I remember thinking, like I'm painting, cleaning, everything to me seemed like choreography or music. Anyway, back in New York, I decided to get my GED diploma. Why? Did I really use it? No. But I did. And I had only been there for 10 months in Amsterdam. So I was back by 1973.
And you've brought us a tape which you recorded shortly after you returned in 1976 or 77 that showcases your voice at a relatively young age. Do you want to tell us about it?
Oh my God. I was first in a group that Kirk Nurak, who, if people don't know who he is, I hope they look him up, because he had this group called the Natural Sound Workshop. And I was which was only voices, which he was conducting, and no instruments, but he formed a group with instruments and some written heads, to the songs. And I was in that group, and I met his partner, Donald Joyce. And Donald Joyce was the music director and organist at this incredibly beautiful church, Grace Church on 4th Avenue in Manhattan. He had the key to the church. And every Wednesday, we would go in, and I had my tiny little pig nose amplifier, and I would be downstairs, and he would be upstairs at this incredible organ, and we'd improvise. We'd get a little stoned, and and then I don't know why I was fascinated by the Burnt Norton text from T.S. Eliot. I don't know if I picked it up and said, "Oh, this would sound great," but Donald went on to record many records, and he traveled the world playing manual pipe organs.
And sadly died of cancer in 1998, only aged 45.
Did you look that up?
Yes.
Michael. Wow.
Let's hear this. It's called Burnt Norton, after the text by T.S. Eliot. It's an old analog recording that hasn't seen the light of day in half a century, but it's still pretty remarkable. Shelley Hirsch with Donald Joyce on Radio Eclectus. You're listening to Radio Eclectus, radical new music from the Northwest and beyond. I'm Mike Schell, and our guest today is Shelley Hirsch, who we heard in a very early recording made in 1976 or 77 at Grace Church in New York, along with the late organist Donald Joyce. And it's interesting that rather crude recording, to me, it only adds to the ambience of the event.
Uh-huh.
What it reminded me of is those lo-fi, distant sounding Sun Ra recordings from the 50s and 60s that make it seem like you're eavesdropping on some kind of secret interstellar music. We've been hearing a lot of these kinds of archival tapes being rediscovered and published during the lockdowns. Some key avant-garde performance that was captured by somebody in the back of the hall with a cassette recorder, but which turns out to be the only documentation of some momentous event.
Well, this one was actually recorded on a reel-to-reel, but the church was so huge that the recording was really hard to get in a space like that.
And your voice sounds different in this recording. Is that because you were younger, or are you closer to your coloratura beginnings?
Yeah, I only learned I was coloratura when I had a very bizarre entrance into Manhattan School of Music and with a private opera teacher, lessons with a private opera teacher. But yeah, I'm kind of shocked. I've been listening to some pieces back then, and well, the voice was pretty damn good. Very high, very clear, and that was very important to me at the time.
Having heard some early Shelley Hirsch, I'd love to play some classic Shelley Hirsch. Could we hear some tracks from your singing and States albums?
Of course, Michael.
Here's Shelley Hirsch on Radio Eclectus. I'm Mike Schell, and our guest today is Shelley Hirsch for her 70th birthday. And we heard some classic Shelley Hirsch, beginning with her album Singing, the track Utanusa, with David Simons on drums and prepared slide guitar, classic improvisational Shelley Hirsch, that was recorded live in concert at the Art Museum in Stuttgart, West Germany in 1985. Then we heard 3 connected solo tracks from your 1997 album States, which was released on Tellus. And this included some non-traditional covers of a couple of pop tunes from the 30s and 40s, Tenderly and Blue Moon, which is a Rodgers and Hart tune, combined with what I think of as the other side of Shelley Hirsch, the storytelling side that we all know and love. So tell us about these 2 pieces.
Okay. Utanusa is the name of a woman that was working at the museum. Uta and then Nusser. But David Simons and I had a long history of improvising together, and we both had a big love of pansori music.
That's the traditional Korean music, yes.
Yes, exactly. And that piece was our kind of homage, so to speak, to that pansori music.
Interesting.
And it was also it was in the museum and very live, very resonant hallways.
And then the music from States. I remember a moment ago you were talking about the sort of music that you grew up listening to with your dad in East New York, Frank Sinatra and whatnot.
I love that you mentioned, because the piece is based around the song Tenderly, which keeps coming up in various ways. 10, I told her. Tender. And Blue. So those Tenderly and Blue, which took the form of Blue Skies for me in a crazy pygmy-like improvisation at the beginning of States, and then ended with Blue Moon. But it's all many things collaged into the music.
Now we've got something queued up that also has this nostalgic quality to it, perhaps more directly connected to East New York and family life. And it's a segment from My Father piece. In the Basement, it's called, included in the Crosstalk compilation. Do you want to introduce that?
Right. Well, once again, that music was composed only from music that I listened to at home, but sampled. I played on the sampling keyboard, and of course Weinstein had to quantize it, but taking samples from, and this particular one is from James Brown, but earlier ones at the beginning of the whole 50-minute piece is music from Mario Lanza, and which I listened to as a child, dancing with my father in the living room. So it's all only from records that I sampled that were listened to by me as a child growing up in East New York. And this piece is sort of like age 16.
And we'll hear your father's voice in it.
Oh, his voice is incredible. I did many interviews with him and with my mother, but this is my father piece.
Now we're going to hear two tracks. In the second one, we're bringing back David Weinstein, who we heard in a duet with you at the beginning of the show. And this comes from a live performance that the two of you did in 2007. And again, it was in Stuttgart, Germany. David's playing a sampling synthesizer with what sounds like a marimba patch. You just published this on Bandcamp as a single in April 2022.
I just found it on my computer, and it's, it was kind of amazing to hear it after decades of it being stored away somewhere. Every room, it was divided into 6 rooms with audiences in between. The rooms each had different objects on the floor. So the living room had feathers on the floor. And it was illuminated every time I'd walk past the light. A light came on, it illuminated the room, and I'd do a song for the room. And this particular section was in a room with pebbles on the floor. The other room, in the last piece part of it, was in this room that had this beautiful chaise lounge and leaves on the ground, and a picture of Ceausescu. And that's when
The
where we
Romanian
did the
dictator.
Romanian song, which was based on a beautiful song by Romica Puceau.
She was a Romani, gypsy folk singer.
I love it so much.
We'll love hearing it too. An excerpt from My Father piece, followed by the just described 2007 Stuttgart performance with David Weinstein. Shelley Hirsch, our featured artist on Radio Eclectus.
Alone with the wax, punished 6 months to a year. Can't go out after school, no makeup, no minis. Stop my after school activities. Stop going to radical left political meetings. Stop going into...
Music by Shelley Hirsch on Radio Eclectus, which brings you radical new music from the Northwest and beyond every Thursday night, 9 p.m. to midnight Pacific time on Hollow Earth Radio, KHUHLP Seattle. And this week, we're bringing you Shelley Hirsch from New York, both her music and her presence via Zoom. Thanks for being here, Shelley.
Thank you, Michael. Appreciate it.
We heard a movement from My Father piece, which you made in 2000, and that comes from the album Crosstalk, a compilation released by Bridge Records in 2008. It featured your father's voice and some language that you don't always hear on the radio, but we waited until FCC safe harbor hours to play that track.
The piece was actually commissioned by a ZDF radio in Berlin, and it was performed at the Intermedium Festival 1 at the Academy of Art in Berlin. And then I brought it to New York and made some revisions. And so the recording is from a live performance at the Kitchen.
After that piece, we heard you once again performing with David Weinstein, a live performance recorded in Stuttgart in 2007, which you told us about beforehand, and which you've just published on Bandcamp as a single entitled Weinstein and Me, which wasn't its title in 2007. And I should point out, David is a keyboard player by trade. We heard him playing a sampling synthesizer. He's another longstanding icon of the downtown New York scene, co-founded Roulette Intermedium, which is one of the most important performance spaces associated with this music for 4.5 decades now. And he's also a radio host. And
I'm glad I was just going to mention that. He has a fantastic program on WFMU.
Ridgewood Radio, it's called,
yes.
Wednesday afternoons, and it draws heavily from the recorded archives of Roulette Intermedium. So a fascinating show, which you can add to your repertoire along with Radio Eclectus and our sister show Flotation Device on KBCS. And of course, David has been a frequent contributor of yours for many years. Duets seem to be a particularly well-suited type of ensemble for you. Can we hear some more duets?
Go ahead.
We've got something queued up from your album called Duets, which you recorded in Kobe, Japan in 2000 with guitarist Kazuhisa Uchihashi. And this particular track we're going to hear kind of swings a little. And then we'll hear your song Never from your duet album with Simon Ho, which is different from everything we've heard so far. So let's hear it. Music by Shelley Hirsch for her 70th birthday on Radio Eclectus.
Never should I have seen you. Never should you have looked at me so. And never should I have whispered in your ear.
You're listening to Radio Eclectus, radical new music from the Northwest and beyond. I'm Mike Schell. And my guest today is Shelley Hirsch, vocalist, composer, raconteur, New Yorker, a leading figure of the downtown music scene, and an old friend who turns 70 today. Happy birthday. We heard a pair of duets featuring Shelley, first with the Japanese guitarist Kazu Uchihashi from the album Duets, recorded live in Kobe, Japan in 2000, released in 2002 by the Innocent label. And then we heard something quite different, the song Never from her duet album with Simon Ho called Where Were You Then, released in 2012 by Zadig Records. And there was actually a third musician on that track, Dave Hostra, playing tuba, along with your voice and Simon's piano and accordion. But let me ask you about the first duet. Was that an improvised text you were singing? The one that ends with, what is your name?
Well, Kazuhisa Uchihashi, known as Kazu, yes. We met at a festival in Germany. Kazu and I had never played duo together. And it was amazing. This guy knew every possible song, and he would launch into something like American standards, or I would, and he would be right there. And all the words, of course, were improvised. And it was so hilarious because there's one part that I say, you don't even know what I'm saying. You know, I'm talking to the audience. You don't even speak English. And I was a little, it was quite an experience. And we recorded it, and that's it. That's the concert.
And you went back and recorded a second volume of duets with Kazu, didn't you?
Yes, that was recorded both at Roulette when he came 10 years later, and the record's called Duets 10 years later, and part of it there, and at Atelier Klaus or was it Cafe Otto? I don't know, but some of the music was recorded from another concert that we did. So, but this one is totally from the Big Apple concert.
The Big Apple in Kobe.
Yeah, in Kobe. Big Apple in Kobe with the Big Apple manager, yeah.
And then there's the song Never. That's quite unlike the more experimental tracks we've been hearing. This was a lot more folksy. It made me think of a klezmer band playing Jacques Brel.
Yeah. Simon Ho, Simu is what I call him. And
Ho is short for Hostetler. He's Swiss. We should point that out.
Right, yeah. So he had heard me in Switzerland in the mid-'80s, and he was a giant fan, and he always remembered me. And we met at Phil Niblock's place. I said, you look very familiar. And he said, oh, I know you. And then he told me the story of how we met. And our music, the music we made was so very different, but we had this beautiful connection and collaborated for about 12 years.
You've recorded with a lot of European musicians.
Yeah.
In fact, you recorded an album in 2010 with 3 other Swiss musicians, and I'd like to play some tracks from it. It's called Walking and Stumbling Through Your Sleep. Would you like to introduce your collaborators?
Yes. It's very interesting because, as you said, I've played with a lot of European musicians and recorded several albums with different European improvising musicians. And Martin Schütz and Hans Koch were in a group that was organized by Butch Morris and the two of them, called Excommunication. And then they invited me to tour with and record, adding Freddie Studer to the trio. So Hans Koch on saxophone and clarinet and other horns and electronics, and Martin Schütz, cello and electronics, and Freddie Studer on percussion and drums.
Let's hear some from Shelley Hirsch and the Koch-Schütz-Studer trio.
Again, I think it's from a live performance.
Recorded in Switzerland in 2010 and released by Intact Records. Music by Shelley Hirsch on Radio Eclectus. Music by vocalist Shelley Hirsch and the Koch-Schütz-Studer trio, sax, electric cello, and drums, with plenty of electronics thrown in. We heard a pair of tracks, Auf dem Land, followed by Luigi Rusolo's Nightmare, from their album Walking and Stumbling Through Your Sleep, recorded in Switzerland in 2010, released 2 years later by Intact Records, that's Intact with a K. Shelley Hirsch is talking with us from New York via Zoom as we survey some career highlights on her 70th birthday. And Shelley, I like this recording because we've been listening to a lot of your solo and duet albums so far, but this music proves that you can also use your voice as an ensemble instrument in a free improv setting. Whereas I've noticed that a lot of singers who try to do that either wind up getting buried in the ensemble texture, or else the music just drifts into the pattern of lead singer plus backup band. How do you approach improvising with a group of instrumentalists that allows you to stay balanced like this?
I mean, I'm probably known most as an improviser because the records that came out with these September Band and the group with Butch Morris and Sven-Åke Johansson and Alex Schlippenbach, and I've just done a lot of free improv, and I don't know, I just have good ears. The problem at the beginning was that I was too much listening and imitating, and then I found my way out of that, like, because I really pick up all the sound. And in Germany and in Europe, they always encouraged me to use words if I felt like it as part of it. So they never said, like certain American people would say, oh no, the singer shouldn't, in an improvised group, don't use words, it takes too much focus. But all of these European guys were like, we love it, it's instant poetry and it's musical and part of the music.
My guest is Shelley Hirsch, vocalist and composer, whose music we've been marveling at. But now it's my turn to play you a couple of tracks by other singers, 2 excerpts about 5 minutes each, and then afterwards we can talk about them and maybe about things like influences and perceptions of influences. So here is music not by Shelley Hirsch on Radio Eclectus.
Yeah.
You're listening to Radio Eclectus on KHUH LP Seattle. I'm Mike Schell. We're visiting with vocalist Shelley Hirsch today in honor of her 70th birthday. But we just heard from a couple of other singers who I haven't yet identified because I'm interested in your impressions, Shelley. We'll start with the first one, a classic, Voice and Electronics. Did you recognize the singer?
Well, Cathy Berberian.
Indeed.
Yeah, I love her.
And that was Berriot's tape piece Visage, which dates from 1961, a fixed media piece from which we heard 5 minutes. It's a 20-minute piece. Do you know the piece?
I have heard it, but long, long ago.
It's not as well known as the other tape piece that Berriot made, Tema, Omaggio a Joyce. That's the famous one, but I think Visage is the better piece.
I need to listen to it again. You know, she improvised and he made a lot of the work based on her improvisations. She's also from a working class family.
That's interesting. But
yeah.
Did you know her music when you started into your own music?
Well, I was always singing, but when I moved out of my family's house and dropped out of school, and was walking home from my job at the American Kennel Club, I used to stop at a record store, and outside was a record, you know, on the pile of for sale or cheaper prices, whatever, Cathy Berberian singing Beatles songs.
Oh, yes.
I love the cover.
Including some arrangements made by Berriot.
Yes, exactly. And I took that home and I was blown away by it. And then I continued to listen to her music with Berriot. And
how about the second excerpt that we heard?
I beautifully sung, and I don't think it's Jean Lee. It isn't, because she never really did those parts with horns like that, quite like that. At least I don't think so.
Well,
I never heard it.
She did at least once, apparently.
So it is her?
That was Jean Lee.
That's who I thought at first, and I said, it can't be her, because who was the ensemble with Günther Hampel?
No, and it's impressive that you thought of her because she's not as well known, but she was performing with Anthony Braxton. That was the Anthony Braxton Quintet, recorded May 22nd, 1972 at Town Hall. And it comes from his Town Hall Trio and Quintet album. And the other musicians were Dave Holland and Barry Altschul, which Braxton performed with in the group Circle. They were put together by Chick Corea during his brief flirtation with the avant-garde. And John Stubblefield was the second reed player.
Well, when I first heard her, I had a friend and somebody that had a great impact on music that I listened to, Stefan Brecht. He happens to be the son of Bertolt Brecht. I didn't know that when I first met him, but he turned me on to this record where Jean Lee is singing Sophisticated Lady on an Archie Shepp record.
Yes,
it was so sublime. And I thought, my God, I feel such a kind of, well, first I was in awe, but also felt a huge camaraderie somehow. And I went to live in Amsterdam soon afterwards, and I looked everywhere, and I couldn't find the record because I had her name spelled wrong in my mind.
Ah, Jeanne, but she pronounced it Jean.
Right.
Lived from 1939 to 2000, and she also recorded with Marion Brown, and she appears in Carla Bley's Escalator Over the Hill.
At first I thought it's got to be her, but I've never heard her just sing parts like that, and so in tune, and such beautiful resonant tones, just gorgeous.
Well, we talked earlier about the recording you made in Switzerland and how I was impressed at your ability to use your voice as an ensemble member. And Jean Lee is doing the same thing, as you pointed out, in that quintet context. And there aren't very many singers that can do that without either getting dominated by the ensemble or dominating the ensemble.
Thank you. There are a few that, especially some in the tradition of Jean Lee, who are singing now. And also Jay Clayton is an extraordinary singer who's a brilliant improviser and, a brilliant singer.
It doesn't sound like Jean Lee was particularly an influence. She was kind of a kindred spirit because you were already doing these things when you heard her. Maybe Berberian was an early influence, as you mentioned. But you also talk about the theater of man. You talk about these life experiences, which seem to be as important to you in formulating your style.
At least, yeah.
As musicians. But it also makes me reflect on how critics have sometimes had a challenge placing you. There was one critic who called you Judy Garland on Mars.
Lottolenia on the Astral Plane. That's an article in Vogue magazine. And John Rockwell of the Times said, Cathy Berberian meets Ella Fitzgerald meets Nancy Sinatra.
So I'm wondering about the Nancy Sinatra part, where he got that idea.
I don't know. Maybe he was listening to a piece where I went into these boots are made for, one of those pop songs. I don't know.
See. Did he hear?
He just really wanted to say I was drawing from a lot of different vocal styles.
Maybe he heard your track on the Big Gun Down that's taken from the Burglars.
That's a great track. That album is, for me, fantastic. And when he put on the production at BAM, I sang all the vocal parts. Like, there are many tunes.
He is John Zorn. The Big Gun Down is John Zorn arranging the music of Ennio Morricone, film music.
Yeah, I think it's a brilliant record. And I'm probably influenced by Jimi Hendrix. I love I'm just bringing this up because I loved the guitar, electric guitar, the embellishments at the end of the phrases, and the change in timbres.
If I imagine you doing the Star Spangled Banner, I imagine it sounding a bit like Hendrix.
That's cute.
But it's Hendrix's guitar playing, not his singing, that.
Well, there's such great music from the period, but it all is about just listening to everything, listening to the sound of trucks going by and the drones and the textures of it, and listening to the people talking with different accents and in different languages, listening to music how it changes as you walk down the street and listen to different things, being in different acoustic settings and how that affects the voice, how that changed what I sang, how I listened to. I said this earlier. I talk about music and the way I listen, but visual art has been enormously inspirational for me. I get so much from seeing visual artwork, installations, and nature. The movement of trees and water is just as inspirational to me as other music that I've listened to.
So the theater of man, the exploration and discovery of the acoustic space that you're performing with, visual art, all these things are inputs in addition to other musicians.
And film, very important for me. Like I told you, the woman who I moved in with in California was studying film, and somehow I was very much involved with a lot of people making experimental film from very early on, and very influenced by it.
That's interesting, because we were talking off mic about Tim Page having the impression that you were like the woman in Woman in the Dunes, the Teshikahara film, as if she was played by Carmen Miranda.
Right. Yeah, he made that.
And Tim's a friend of ours. We're not mad at you, Tim. It's okay. But...
No, he's okay. I told him that because he just raved about my singing, but said she's not a very accomplished composer yet. I mean, that was 1983, and he's a wonderful guy and a great writer.
When we talk about influences, that brings us to Jerry Hunt, who is a dear friend and collaborator to both of us. We've played his music on Radio Eclectus. For those not familiar with him, I'll mentioned that he was a Texan composer, lived from 1943 to 1993, almost an exact contemporary of Frank Zappa, who, like Jerry, was an American maverick with an accelerated metabolism. And Jerry's music and his live performances explored the theme of shamanism as a cultural precedent for the agents of modern technology, especially invisible and incorporeal technology like radio. And we're playing some of his music in the background now. Can you tell me how you got connected with Jerry?
Well, I saw him perform. People had been raving about him, and I saw him perform at Roulette when it was at Jim Staley's loft, and people flipped out. I mean, it was one of the most mesmerizing performances I'd ever seen. And in that small space, him with his wands and his white lab coat, I was just totally knocked out.
He looked like a Central Texas meat inspector who was performing the Stations of the
Perfect.
Cross.
Yes. Perfect, Michael. And then we were on several bills together in Europe and in the States. And so I got to know him more. I loved his partner, Stephen, too. And once I
Stephen
saw
Housewright, who just did a reading in New York of his autobiography with Jerry.
Of his memoir about life called Partners on Blank Forms.
And you can also read it online at jerryhunt.org. There's a PDF version of his book available to read as well.
Well, just about Stephen, Jerry being this wild, crazy, moving, and I was often known to really move a lot in my performances and sing and sometimes get into these crazy states or possessed trance-like states. So I spent several years making a piece called For Jerry, homages and virtual duets with the late, great Jerry Hunt. Because Rod Stasek and Stephen sent me tons of videotapes and recordings and writing of Jerry's that they said I could use in my performances.
Rod Stasek, a good friend of Jerry's, who's managed many of his artistic affairs after his death.
Yes, who's in one of the pieces in...
4 video translations. And
thank you very much.
Talk Slice Duplex.
Yes, in one of the pieces, I blacked out Rod and I'm recorded live with my head having a duet with Jerry. It's online somewhere on YouTube.
Go and Google Shelley Hirsch, Jerry Hunt, and we'll point out Shelley Hirsch, that's Shelley.
Thank you, Michael.
Hirsch, remember those letters. And Jerry Hunt is as you would expect it. And there are also links to this at jerryhunt.org.
And go to Blank Forms to see the extraordinary exhibit and like the book they published. They're just really were so thorough.
That's Blank Forms in Brooklyn. It closes on June 11th, so get there in a hurry if you can, if you're in New York.
Oh, right, yeah.
And more information on that is at blankforms.org.
Yeah, it's extraordinary. They published records and this amazing book, and also republished, printed Stephen's book.
You did get to record some duets with Jerry. It's a different kind of duet. And we're going to hear a couple of them coming up. Do you want to introduce them?
Well, these are song drapes, and I went to Zorn's house, John Zorn, and played him some of the video that I made from my pieces and my collaged work of Jerry Hunt.
He originally created the song drapes in 1992 for the Finley Hunt Report, which is a collaborative performance with Karen Finley. So these were originally basically electronic accompaniments to unspecified text that she would deliver.
Thank you for pointing that out. But when he heard the song drapes, he decided to put it out on Zodic, and Karen recorded some, and Mike Patton recorded 1 or 2, and I did. Now, I used many of them in my performances. He didn't choose the ones for me that I might have chosen, but I used text from Jerry's what I read about Jerry in the pieces that you're going to play.
We're going to hear two song drapes in your interpretation from this 1999 album on Zadig Records. One you subtitled Mail Order Church, and the other one you subtitled Birds.
Right.
And those titles should be quite apparent as we hear them. Music by Jerry Hunt, interpreted by Shelley Hirsch on Radio Eclectus.
Jerry was always interested in magic, spiritual realms, and arcane knowledge. At the age of 12, he joined the American Order of Rosicrucian.
Music by Jerry Hunt, interpreted by Shelley Hirsch. We heard her perform two of Hunt's song drapes, which are electronic accompaniments to unspecified vocal performances. They were originally made to accompany Karen Finley monologues in their collaborative performance, The Finley-Hunt Report from 1992, the year before Jerry's death. And they were recorded for Zadig Records in 1998 by Finley and Shelley and Mike Patton. I'm Mike Schell, and there's a lot of information about Jerry Hunt's life and work, including an introductory article that I wrote about him for MusicWorks magazine at jerryhunt.org. But my guest today on Radio Eclectus is Shelley Hirsch, who's celebrating her 70th birthday, and we're celebrating her 70th birthday as well. And before the song drapes, you were talking about the live performances you've done relating to Jerry Hunt using video footage of him. And those are available online at YouTube and Vimeo for people who Google Shelley Hirsch, Jerry Hunt. We've got a bit of time left, and I hope we've managed to hit at least some of the highlights of your career thus far. But you've brought in a couple of morsels for us, some recent projects that haven't yet been squeezed onto a record. You've got something called Squeegee Mix that you recorded with a trio.
A quartet. Michael Evans, who was the percussionist, passed away 2 months after we made the recording.
Also Michael Foster and Gordon Bieferman.
Yes. So it was a quartet recording.
Voice, saxophone, drums, and...
keyboard, yeah.
And then Carpet is a solo piece, yes?
Yeah, the thing is, I had this incredible residency in Hudson, New York at the Second Ward Foundation. And I asked the curator if he would print out my writing. And he said, I just love these. He's not really a fan of new music so much, but he loved the text. So I was searching through my computer for pieces that I had made previously, soundtracks to other pieces. And this Carpet thing, which was from a much earlier piece, felt perfect for the text that you will hear. I called it Carpet for you, but I call that piece, Her Hair is Like an Ocean.
Well, let's hear it then. Squeegee, followed by Her Hair is Like an Ocean, music by Shelley Hirsch on Radio Eclectus.
So the next train to, where was it? Maybe Birmingham, I don't know, but I want to get on it. I love looking out at the windows, not at the window, through the window, you know what I mean? Like through it when the glass is clean. Sometimes I'm riding a train and I take my window.
Music by Shelley Hirsch on Radio Eclectus. We began with something called Squeegee, which featured Shelley's voice with Michael Foster on sax, the late Michael Evans on drums, and Gordon Bieferman on keyboards. And that was followed by a solo piece called Her Hair is Like an Ocean, relating to an earlier project called Carpet. We've been speaking with Shelley Hirsch today in honor of her 70th birthday. Is Squeegee destined to appear on an album?
Yes. We're just trying to find the right label for it.
And then Her Hair is Like an Ocean relates to some things that you're up to now.
Yes. I've been since the pandemic, or probably before, writing to music that I'm listening to, whether it's concert online or live, or the music of Eliane Radic or Morton Feldman, and writing stream of consciousness. And the particular piece, Her Hair is Like an Ocean, refers to Sylvie Courvoisier playing piano.
The Swiss
and it was a
keyboardist.
Nate Woolley piece that I was writing to.
I see. Nate Woolley is a trumpeter based there in New
And
York.
composer, yeah.
We've got one more Shelley Hirsch performance to share on the program, but before we let you go, are there any other projects that you've got in flight that we should be on the lookout for?
Well, I got a generous grant to record my text with my composed settings. And also, at the beginning of the piece that I did in Hudson, New York, at Second Ward on my residency, I do this crazy piece with sticks. It sounds a lot like Utanusa.
That's the piece that we heard from your album Singing
Yes,
toward the
exactly.
beginning of the program.
Well, it feels very Korean, and it's done in a staircase. And I have these 2 metal poles, and I'm playing with them on the staircase. And I thought, I want to have an instrument that is can take different forms. It can be a wand, it can be a baton, it can be a golf club, it can be many things, and it would record sound and play back. And at the tip of it would be something that would allow me to write text live and have it projected. Lately, I found that, yes, this would be perfect for me because I could improvise with it. It could be collapsible and take many different forms. I could write with it. And so this new instrument is born.
So to follow the progress on this, of course, people can keep tuning into Radio Eclectus and Flotation Device, where we'll play these albums as they materialize. But you're also on Bandcamp, you're on SoundCloud, you're on YouTube and Vimeo, and people can Google your name, Shelley Hirsch. We're going to turn now to another collaboration of yours. It's Agamemnon, the opera, after the drama by Aeschylus. And there's an interesting story to it. It was organized in the late 1980s by a pair of musicians, the late David Avador and Nicole Gagne.
They were producers and writers.
David's mainly remembered as a recording engineer, I think.
Right.
And Nicole is
Cole
known as an
at the
author.
time, who's now Nicole, was a writer as well, and they produced it together and put it all together.
She edited the Historical Dictionary of Modern and Contemporary Classical Music, among other things.
Right.
But it was recorded by them along with a very impressive list of prominent New York musicians. Besides you, there's Fred Frith, Julius Eastman, Artur Lindsay, Blue Jean Tyranny, Pauline Oliveros, and Robert Ashley, whose voice we're about to hear alongside yours. And apparently the opera was completed in 1992, but it never got made into a CD. And it was finally released on Bandcamp just a few years ago without much fanfare. And it wasn't until 2019 that it began to be noticed by people. And the word quickly spread via social media about this great underground opera with all of these downtown superstars in the late 80s. So we're going to play Act 4, which is about 20 minutes long, and it features you as the singing voice of Cassandra and Robert Ashley as the spoken voice of the Greek chorus, with Avador and Gagne creating the other electronic sounds.
Well, I did my live electronics.
I see. So what sounds like bird sounds and whatnot, is that yours? Okay.
Well, there might be some sounds that they added, but all those loopings and digital, I was using 2 digital delays.
The processing of your own voice is yours.
Yes. I was thrilled that they put Robert Ashley together with my part, and
So
I love it.
You weren't recording together in the studio
Not
at the same
at
time.
all. They recorded me, voice and electronics, and Robert Ashley separately.
Did they give you any musical direction, or is is what you're
Well,
doing completely improvised aside from the text.
but with the text, yeah. And I adore Robert Ashley's work, by the way.
I've always thought Ashley worked best when he was working with other voices and perhaps some other directorial voice in addition to his own. So I love the way the two of you sound together. I love how he sounded in The Commission, the video opera by Woody Vasulka, where he was paired with Ernest Gusella.
Right.
Ashley plays the role of Berlioz and Gusella is Paganini. And I think you're a great choice for Cassandra. That's a classic Shelley Hirsch.
Well, I love the text, and I loved performing it and recording it in the studio. It was just a pleasure.
Shelley, it's been a pleasure to see you again
Thank you.
and to spend all this time with you and your music, catching up with things and revisiting fond memories, since I haven't seen you since I left New York many years ago. And I haven't forgotten your kindness to me over the years either. So thank you so much for joining us today, and happy birthday once more.
Thank you so much, Michael. Glad to be here. Glad to see you again, and I appreciate it.
Let's hear Shelley Hirsch and Robert Ashley in Agamemnon, the opera.
Warm my throat to bathe the blade.
The sprite of God. She serves in furious rage.